So recently we got a new event, and it was all about music festivals and rock and roll. And naturally, Shinan was not invited. Well, at least she's not part of the promotional material, or the poster, or the cover, or anything of that nature. So I decided that she was going to be in charge of this event, and I needed an excuse to make a video about her. So without further ado, let me ask you a question. Do you remember the artifact set Retracing Bolide? If the answer is yes, you're lying. But seriously, here we have a set that was designed with probably maybe 2 characters in mind, in a domain that also had an artifact set that even who it was designed for doesn't use it. Genshin was weird back in the day. Now, even since then, one of the 2 characters that would have used Retracing Bolide, namely Noelle, has actually gotten a much better set since then. But Shinan hasn't, and she is of course the other dedicated user of this set. Shinan on her own makes for a very interesting topic, given her history in Genshin and what she is as a character, being one of the very few truly hybrid characters. But ultimately, the goal of this video is to find out if Shinan, and by extension, Retracing Bolide, can still sort of hold up in a more modern Genshin environment. Given that I've already spoken ad nauseum on Shinan as a character, I'm not going to be going into a lot of detail on her, but before we get started, I would like to do a recap. First are her normal and charge attacks, which have no baseline synergies, but do have acceptable scaling on them. For her skill, she swings her guitar, dealing pyro damage, and based on the number of enemies hit, she'll apply a shield that affects your entire party. For her burst, she will deal a massive amount of physical damage, as well as a little bit of ticking pyro damage in an area around herself. Her passives make it easier for her to get a bigger shield by hitting less enemies, as well as giving bonus physical damage to characters affected by her shield. Most of her constellations will give her bonuses to crit rate on her burst, increasing her normal attack speed, as well as her charged attack speed, which is pretty rare in a lot of cases, and just more benefits to being a physical DPS, with the most important one of them being her C6, which gives her defense scaling on her charged attack, in addition to lowering the stamina cost on it, making her really able to spam it out for a long period of time. With the recap finished, I'd like to cover a team comp that we're going to be doing for this test, and then I'll be getting into the meat and potatoes and really breaking down what the hell Retracing Bolide even does. Ironically, it is refreshingly simple, but we'll get there when we get there. Given that this is going to be a very shield-centric team comp, it does make sense to start with one of the best shields in the game, in addition to being one of the few ways of lowering physical resistance without a reaction. And of course, I'm talking about Mr. Zhongli. With Zhongli's shield in tow, we now have a different problem we have to solve. How do we do Superconduct? With most good physical DPS, good in massive quotation marks of course, they're either cryo or electro, and that's by design, meaning that they are half of the combo that you need to make Superconduct. Shinan as a physical DPS does not have that advantage though, given that she's pyro. So we have to be able to force the Superconduct into our team in order to really make it work. For electro options, I went through quite a few different variations in my head before landing on Cookie Shinobu. A team like this doesn't necessarily need a healer, but a constant source of electro in an area around ourselves, plus that extra little bit of healing, is going to be really nice if we're caught with our pants down. For our cryo unit, I actually opted for Rosaria. Now of course we do have 1.5 million different cryo options. I came to the conclusion that Rosaria with Noblesse Oblige would be one of the more optimal options. Given that she can do sizable damage on her own, she gives a crit rate buff, as well as having just generally good cryo application. Made sense in my head. Quickly to touch on the artifact sets that they're going to be using, Zhongli will be using Tenacity of the Millelith for its various buffs, Cookie Shinobu will be using the newest healing set for its own unique buff for a healer, and Rosaria, as mentioned before, will be using Noblesse Oblige for its distinct attack buff. So let's actually talk about Retracing Bolide. This is a relic of the past. Or I guess you could say an artifact of the past. I'm sorry. Its 2-piece bonus increases shield strength by 35%, which on paper sounds pretty good, but unfortunately, the shield strength buff isn't actually very good. It usually ends up being better just to use more of the relevant stat than it is to have something that says increase shield strength. But it's not the worst thing ever, and it does actually do something, just not for our damage. The 4-piece is what makes this set at least remotely interesting. While protected by a shield, the equipped character will gain an additional 40% normal and charged attack damage. 40% bonus damage is pretty good, and the requirement of having a shield is pretty easy. In theory, you could run this on anyone. But the only 2 characters in the game that are DPS oriented and revolve around making their own shields are Noelle and Shinan. Given that I mentioned before, Noelle has a much better option now, Shinyan's really the only character that could even dream of keeping the set alive. And isn't that a match made in heaven, right? One of the most underused characters in the game, with debatably the most underused set in the game. Now, again, the set on paper isn't that bad, and I actually think that there's a way to save this set in a very easy way, and I think it's actually the 2-piece bonus. If this set had a little bit of extra stat in its 2-piece, say like bonus defense, bonus attack, anything of the sort, I think this could be a lot better. However, that's not what this video is about. This video is about figuring out if this set can still work in certain scenarios, and I do think it has some hope. Now, I'm not saying that this set is going to be out-damaging or outperforming other options out there. Say, even like a 2-piece of Marechaussee and a 2-piece of Pale Flame will probably outperform this. But given that I have some artifacts with some okay stats, I figure I can make the best of it. Now, worth noting, I didn't actually farm the domain this set came from. No, I actually just strongboxed the entire thing. Because, well, have you actually been in that domain before? I don't even remember what's in it. But I digress. I want to quickly touch on a few other things before we get started, and then I want to take you with me on a tour of the Spiral Abyss run that I did using this set and this very same Shinan team. Quick note, the rotation for this team is pretty straightforward. It's going to require maintaining Zhongli shield, Cookie skill, and trying to have the best uptime as we can on Rosaria's burst. Other than that, it's very simple. Shinan puts up her shield, she uses her burst, and then she starts spinning, thus explaining the moniker of Spin Yan. Anyway, let's get into the meat and potatoes and talk about how this run actually ended up going. So first thing was first, I needed to decide what side of the Abyss we were going to send Shinan on. And ultimately, it was pretty obvious. It had to be the first half. Putting her on the second half was going to be a death sentence. Namely because, well, half of the second half was just breaking shields. And Shinan, not very good at doing that on her own. Especially when it's in single target scenarios. So it was kind of a non-starter. So I got started on the first half, and that of course led us into the Magukenki triplets. And truth be told, this went way better than I expected. Shinan proved to be really good at dispatching these 3 Wonder Twins. Wonder Triplets? Whatever. Point is, she did really well, and the only reason we ended up taking 2 minutes was because the Cryo Triplet just didn't want to group up. Honestly, with a few more attempts, and a slightly better placement, I think this could have been a 3-star very easily. Otherwise, it was an average 2-star, and was acceptable, but could have been better, and was strictly a skill issue. On the next floor, we were against Capellius, and let me tell you, this sucked. This was really bad. This is when I remembered just how bad Shinan is in a single target environment. She does not handle single target well. On top of that, we found ourselves having to break a cryo shield, which you'd think a pyro character could do that very well. Not Shinan. She can't produce enough pyro damage to actually break the shield on command. Not comfortably, at least. If I could line up the burst in a meaningful way, that could work. But then we'd be losing massive amounts of damage on that burst, because her burst actually does hit very hard. So it kind of just created a dilemma. This ended up being a 1-star endeavor, but was only a couple of seconds away from the 2, meaning it was possible, and maybe with some team rejigging, for example if I was utilizing a Bennett in this situation, not that I could use a Bennett because my Bennett's C6, but something like that could have made this very, very 2-starable. 3 stars, out of the question. 2 stars though, totally plausible. For the final chamber, we start off against a couple of Fatui guys, which we are able to deal with relatively well. It ended up taking a little longer than I think it should have, mainly because I wasn't able to group them up efficiently, but with a little bit of practice, I think I could have gotten this down a little bit smoother. As the next wave spawns in, with the next wave coming in, we're faced with Eremites and Samurai, which are generally easily dispatched, and Shinan has absolutely no issues in dealing with them. Our next wave leaves us into a couple of robots, which actually do prove to be a bit of an issue, not for positioning, but because they have physical resistance. Thankfully, with all of our resistance shred, we're not really feeling that resistance all that much, but it is noticeable compared to some of the other damage we've been putting out. After those 2 are dispatched, we're left with a couple of dog mechs, as well as one of these big mechanical arm mechs, and again this leaves us in a situation where we're doing single target damage. It's not ideal. We're able to get it down without too much issue, though it does take just a little bit too long. This unfortunately sets us up for only a single star. But we did manage to clear it, which is, well, better than some people might expect of a Shinan. So, did Retracing Bolide actually do anything in this context? And the answer is, kinda. Honestly, it wasn't the worst situation that I've been in, as far as building a character is concerned, and it performed decently well. It is worth noting that Shinan in this sort of abyss isn't the best. It's not... There's a lot of situations that she does not excel at. With the exception of the first chamber, every other chamber just makes her life pretty miserable. As an off-meta option, it does work on your Shinan. But even on Shinan, who's already very, very off-meta on her own, this is one of the lesser options. Though it was kind of interesting to take a look back at an artifact set that has not seen the light of day since, what, 1906 or something? It's old. Damn old. And it raises the question, do you guys think that there will ever be another character that might actually use this set in a meaningful way? Maybe a character that somehow scales with shield strength? I don't even know how that would work. But actually, while we're at it, why don't we just make them an HP scaling character that scales with shield strength and can use the bell while they're at it? And maybe while we're living in Fantasyland, they'll buff Shinan too in the same patch. But I digress. So ultimately, the final answer is the set is okay, it can work, but it was forgotten for a reason, I think. And there's just better options now. So with that, if you like what I'm doing, and you want to see more, please leave a like, please subscribe, comment down below if you have any experience with this set yourself, or even still use it. Also, if there's any other artifact sets out there that have been forgotten by time that you'd like to see me talk about, please leave it down in the comment below. But now, I think I need a break from Shinan. So that's all from me. Cheers.